Cinderella signs a no-touch marriage with a reclusive millionaire. Until love breaks the rules. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to tonight's story. Cinderella signs a no-touch marriage with a reclusive millionaire until love breaks the rules. It all began on a quiet night inside a penthouse that looked more like a museum than a home. The city lights glimmered through the tall windows, spilling gold reflections onto a white silk bedspread. On that bed, surrounded by scattered rose petals, sat two people who could not have been more different. Ethan Reeves, 34, a self-made millionaire known for his ruthless logic and calm precision, leaned against the headboard in a crisp white shirt. His eyes were steady, unreadable. Across from him sat Lena Brooks, a young woman with a second-hand green dress, her fingers trembling as she held a silver pen. Between them lay a single document, a marriage contract. Ethan's voice broke the silence, low and even. "Let us be clear, Miss Brooks. This is not about love. It is about order." Lena swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "You want to get married? Here? On this bed?" He did not flinch. "I do not mix business with comfort. This is the quietest place in the house, and the safest." He opened the contract, reading each line as if it were a business deal. No touching, no emotions. 1 year, $1 million. Lena's breath caught. She looked at him, searching for some trace of humanity behind those ice-blue eyes. "What happens after the year ends?" Ethan met her gaze. "You walk away, debt-free, and I walk away unbothered." For a long moment, only the hum of the city filled the air. Then he slid the pen toward her, a sleek silver one, engraved with the words, "To live again." She hesitated. That phrase felt strange in her hand, as if mocking the silence between them. But she remembered her mother in the hospital, the unpaid bills, the hopeless nights. Her hand shook slightly as she signed her name on the paper resting against the soft fabric of the bed. The sound of the pen scratching the page felt louder than thunder. Ethan watched, his expression unreadable, but his eyes lingered on her trembling fingers. When she finished, she pushed the document toward him. He took the pen, turned it once between his fingers, and signed his name with sharp, decisive strokes. Then he placed the contract on the nightstand beside the lamp. For a second, their hands almost touched. The distance between their fingertips was no more than an inch, the width of a promise they both swore not to break. "You will move into the guest room tomorrow," he said quietly. "We appear together at the charity gala this Friday. No interviews, no unnecessary talk. Understand?" She nodded. "Yes, Mr. Reeves." His gaze softened just slightly. "Call me Ethan, at least while the cameras are rolling." Lena managed a nervous smile. "And off camera?" He paused. "Then I am just the man who paid for your piece." The light flickered, casting their silhouettes on the wall, two strangers bound by ink and circumstance. Neither of them knew that the same bed where they signed that cold contract would soon witness something that could not be written in any clause. That night, as Ethan turned off the lamp, his voice came out softer than before. "Get some sleep, Lena. You will need your strength. The real performance begins tomorrow." And with that, the room fell silent except for the faint sound of her heartbeat, echoing against the promise they both pretended not to feel. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the sheer curtains of the penthouse bedroom. The white sheets were smooth, untouched, as if the night before had been nothing but a strange dream. Lena blinked against the golden light, realizing she had barely slept. The echoes of Ethan's voice, calm, distant, commanding, still lingered in her mind. The first thing she saw was the silver pen lying on the nightstand, right beside the signed contract, "To live again." The words shimmered faintly under the morning sun, almost mocking her hesitation from the night before. From somewhere beyond the glass doors, the low hum of conversation reached her. She slipped out of bed, straightened her green dress, and stepped into the living area. Ethan was already awake, sitting at the dining table, dressed sharply in a charcoal gray suit. A black coffee steamed beside his tablet, and he barely looked up when she entered. "You are up early," he said without emotion. "I could not sleep much," she admitted. "I kept thinking about what I signed." Ethan finally raised his eyes. Doubt is natural, regret is optional. His tone was cold yet not cruel. She noticed his tie was slightly off-center. He had the look of a man who never let anything slide except, perhaps, himself. "I ordered breakfast," he continued. "You will need your energy. The stylist arrives in an hour to prepare you for the gala. You will wear what they bring, speak only when spoken to, and smile as if you are used to being adored. Lena sat down carefully at the opposite end of the table. A bowl of fresh fruit waited for her, arranged perfectly, too perfect for her appetite. She stared at the bright strawberries and asked quietly, "Do you always control everything this precisely?" Ethan sipped his coffee. "Control prevents cows. Cows destroys imperies." She almost laughed, but the look in his eyes silenced her. There was something behind that calm exhaustion, maybe even loneliness. "Why me, Ethan?" she asked softly. "You could have chosen anyone for this deal." His answer came without hesitation. "Because you did not ask for it. You did not chase me, or my money. That makes you the only one I can trust." The words hit her harder than she expected. She lowered her gaze, tracing the rim of her glass. A few moments later, a woman in a sleek black uniform entered with a tray. "Mr. Reeves, your car will be ready in 20 minutes, she said. He nodded, then stood. "I have meetings until noon," he said to Lena. "Stay here. The staff will assist you with fittings. And remember the first rule, no touching," she murmured automatically. He glanced at her, a flicker of amusement crossing his face. "Good. You learn fast." When the door closed behind him, the silence felt heavier. Lena turned toward the floor-to-ceiling window. The city stretched endlessly below a world of noise, distance, and people who would never imagine that a marriage had just been written like a business contract above them. She opened the folder again, her name beside his, in black ink, legal, irrevocable, cold. And yet, her fingers lingered on the spot where his signature touched hers. The ink had bled slightly, forming a faint line that connected their names together. Hours later, when the stylist arrived with gowns and jewelry, Lena stood before the mirror, almost unrecognizable. Her reflection looked elegant, confident, someone who belonged in Ethan Reeves's world. But her eyes betrayed the truth. She still felt like the maid who cleaned luxury rooms, not the woman who suddenly lived inside one. As the evening approached, she heard the elevator doors open again. Ethan stepped out, his suit perfectly tailored, his expression unreadable. For a brief moment, he stopped, looking at her reflection in the mirror. "You clean up well," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, unsure if it was a compliment or another command. He straightened his cufflinks. "Remember, Lena, tonight everyone will be watching. They believe what we show them, nothing more." She nodded, but her heart was unsteady. When he offered his arm, she hesitated, recalling the contract. "No touching, right?" Ethan looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "I will allow this one exception. Appearances must be convincing." His arm was firm and warm beneath her hand. As they stepped into the elevator together, she felt the strange pull of two worlds colliding, hers, fragile and honest, and his, built on control and distance. Neither of them said another word, but both knew that the deal they made last night was no longer just about survival. It had already started to feel dangerously real. The charity gala arrived faster than Lena expected. By the time the black car stopped in front of the glass ballroom, her hands were already cold. The flashes of cameras lit up the entrance like lightning, and every instinct in her body told her to run. But Ethan was there beside her, tall and calm, the kind of man who made silence feel powerful. When he stepped out, the crowd's noise shifted, a wave of whispers following him. He reached back and offered his hand. "Remember," he said quietly, "you are Mrs. Reeves now. Walk with your head high." She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, not intimate, just enough to steady her trembling fingers. Together they moved through the golden-lit hallway, the world's eyes fixed on them. Inside, crystal chandeliers shimmered over polished floors, and the scent of white roses floated through the air. Ethan greeted people effortlessly, every nod and handshake precise. Lena followed his lead, smiling when needed, her voice calm even when her pulse raced. For a while, she thought she might survive the night unnoticed, until a reporter with a sharp voice stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," the man said, camera light aimed directly at their faces, "is it true this marriage was arranged? That your company board demanded you find a wife to keep your position?" Ethan's jaw tightened. Before he could speak, the reporter turned to Lena. "And you, Mrs. Reeves? What did you gain in this deal? A mansion? $1 million? The air froze. She felt her throat tighten. But before she could answer, Ethan's voice cut through the noise. "I think you have mistaken gossip for journalism," he said evenly. "My wife has nothing to prove to anyone here." The room went silent. He stepped closer to her, resting his hand lightly on her back, a small gesture, but enough to send a ripple through the crowd. The cameras clicked faster. Lena looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. For the first time, his touch did not feel like a rule being broken. It felt like protection. When the reporter finally stepped back, embarrassed, Ethan guided her away from the flashing lights. "Breathe," he murmured. "You handled that well." "I did nothing," she said, voice trembling. "You did not run," he replied. "That is enough." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of champagne, conversations, and shallow smiles. Ethan moved like a man who had memorized every step of the social dance, while Lena floated beside him, the echo of his hand on her back still lingering. Later that night, back at the penthouse, the silence returned. The city glowed outside the tall windows, distant and cold. Ethan loosened his tie and poured himself a glass of whiskey. Lena stood by the doorway, unsure if she should speak. "Thank you," she said finally, "for standing up for me back there." He glanced at her, expression unreadable. "You did not deserve their cruelty, that is all." "You could have ignored it," she said. "You could have let me answer." "I do not let people fight battles they cannot win," he said, taking a slow sip. "It is not kindness, it is strategy." Lena stepped closer. "You sound like a man who has lost before." He looked at her for a long moment, his voice dropping low. "Everyone loses something. Some of us just learn to hide the scars." Their eyes met, and the space between them seemed to hum. She could smell the faint scent of oak and smoke from his drink. For a second, neither moved. Then he set the glass down, straightened his cuffs, and said softly, "Good night, Mrs. Reeves." "Good night, Mr. Reeves," she whispered back. He walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers just enough for her heart to skip. When the door to his room closed, Lena stood alone in the dim light, staring at the city far below. She touched her back where his hand had been earlier. It was such a small thing, a brief gesture in a crowd, yet it burned warmer than any promise. She looked at the contract on the nightstand, the words "no touch" printed in black ink. For the first time she wondered if Ethan Reeves had written that rule to protect his business or to protect himself. And somewhere, deep down, she knew the line they had drawn was already starting to fade. The following days unfolded with an unusual rhythm. The tabloids buzzed with photos from the gala, headlines speculating about the no-touch marriage. Lena stopped checking the news after the third day. She focused instead on learning Ethan's routines. He was precise, almost mechanical. Every morning at 6, he read the business section with black coffee. By 7, he was in meetings. By 8, he disappeared into his private office on the top floor, a place no one dared enter. Yet sometimes, she caught glimpses of him that did not fit the legend. Once, she saw him quietly place a generous tip in an envelope for the housekeeping staff. Another time, he stopped in the hallway to fix a crooked painting on the wall. Those small acts made him human, and that frightened her more than his coldness. One evening, the sound of rain tapped against the glass walls. Lena sat on the couch sketching idly, her pencil moving without thought. It was the one habit she could not let go of. Drawing calmed her. She had just finished the curve of a jawline when a voice broke the silence behind her. "You draw." She turned. Ethan stood there, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked different at night, less untouchable. "It is nothing," she said quickly, closing the sketchbook. He stepped closer. "You hide your art like it is a crime. It is not art, it is just practice." "Practice," he repeated, taking the book gently from her hands before she could stop him. He flipped it open, scanning the pages. His voice softened. "You sketched me." Lena's breath caught. She had drawn him from memory, the hard lines of his face, the stillness in his eyes. "It was not intentional," she said, embarrassed. Ethan looked at the drawing for a long moment before closing the book. "Intent does not matter. Only truth does." He handed it back, his gaze steady. "You see people differently, Lena. You see what they try to hide." She felt her throat tighten. "Maybe because I have hidden things, too." The silence stretched between them. The rain outside grew heavier, beating against the windows like a heartbeat. Ethan exhaled slowly, his voice low. "When I was younger, I used to paint. My father called it a waste of time. He said emotions make weak leaders." Her eyes widened. "You painted?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "Once. Before I learned that feelings are dangerous." Lena looked at him then, really looked the way his shoulders stayed tense even when he tried to relax, the way his words were careful, never wasted. "You are not as heartless as you want people to think," she said quietly. Ethan met her gaze, and for the first time, he did not deny it. "Careful, Mrs. Reeves. You are starting to sound like you care." Her lips curved slightly. "Maybe I do." He turned away, walking toward the window, hands in his pockets. Emotions are messy. They destroy balance. Maybe balance is overrated, she replied. That earned her a look half warning, half something else. Go to bed, Lena. Tomorrow we meet the board. They will expect a perfect wife. When he left, the room felt colder. She looked at her sketchbook, her pulse unsteady. She turned to the page where his portrait stared back at her, a man made of sharp lines and quiet storms. The next morning, the driver took them to Reeves Enterprises headquarters. Lena walked beside Ethan, dressed elegantly in navy blue. The employees stared, whispering, but Ethan's presence silenced the room. During the meeting, she sat quietly, watching him command every detail, every voice. At one point, a board member joked, "Your wife is quieter than expected. Did you include that in the contract too?" Ethan's gaze turned to ice. My wife's strength is in her silence. When she speaks, she does not waste words. Lena felt heat rise to her cheeks. The others laughed awkwardly, but she saw the faintest trace of pride in his expression. That evening, back at the penthouse, Ethan loosened his tie again, looking out at the skyline. "You handled yourself well today," he said without turning around. "I barely spoke," she answered. "Exactly," he said, sipping his whiskey. "You spoke only when it mattered." Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe you are teaching me control." He looked at her then, eyes dark but softer than before. "Or maybe you are teaching me how to lose it." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, thunder rolled over the city, and the reflection of lightning crossed his face. It was in that quiet flash of light that she realized something had shifted. The contract they signed on a bed was no longer just ink on paper. It was becoming a heartbeat neither of them could control. A week passed after the board meeting, and the world around Ethan and Lena began to change in quiet, invisible ways. The tabloids stopped calling her a gold digger and started calling her the mysterious Mrs. Plank. Reeves, her calm confidence during public events, the way she stood beside Ethan without demanding the spotlight, made people curious. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect power couple. But inside the penthouse, the distance between them was growing fragile, a thin line stretched between duty and desire. One evening, Ethan arrived home later than usual. The rain had just stopped, and his coat was still damp. He found Lena sitting by the fireplace with her sketchbook open. The glow from the flames painted her face in soft light. She looked up when he entered. "You skipped dinner," she said. "I had a meeting that ran late," he replied, loosening his tie. His tone was flat, but his eyes lingered on her a second too long. "You should eat." "I already did. I left yours in the kitchen." He walked past her, heading for the stairs, but her voice stopped him. "Ethan." He turned slightly. "Yes?" "You do not have to keep pretending that you are made of stone," she said. "I see it, you know. The way you carry too much. The way you try not to feel anything." For a moment, silence filled the room except for the faint crackle of the fire. Then he said quietly, "Feelings are liabilities. I learned that early." "Maybe that is why you do not sleep," she said softly. He looked at her sharply, but there was no anger in his eyes this time, only surprise. "How do you know that?" "I hear you walking at night," she admitted. "You pace. You stop by the window, sometimes by my door." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "You notice too much, and you hide too much," she replied. The air grew heavy. She stood and walked closer to him. "We signed a contract to act like strangers, but lately it feels like you are fighting something real." He looked down at her, expression unreadable. "You think you understand me?" "No," she said, "but I want to." Something in him faltered then. He took a small step closer, close enough for her to see the faint scar near his temple, a mark he never spoke about. His voice dropped low. "There was a fire. Years ago. I pulled people out until I could not anymore. My father did not make it." Her eyes widened. "I did not know." "I do not tell people," he said. "The press would twist it. The board would see weakness. That is why the rules exist. Distance protects everything I built." She wanted to reach for his hand, but stopped, remembering the first clause of their deal. "Still," she whispered, "maybe distance also destroys the things that matter most." Ethan looked at her for a long time. Then he turned toward the fire and said quietly, "Go to sleep, Lena." But when he thought she was gone, he spoke again so softly she almost missed it. "You remind me of who I was before the rules." The next morning, she woke to find a small note on the table beside her breakfast tray. His handwriting was sharp and neat. "You have a meeting today with the charity team. Represent us well. E.R." She smiled faintly. It was not affection, but it was acknowledgement, the kind of trust he rarely gave. That afternoon, Lena presented her first proposal for a foundation program supporting art therapy for trauma survivors. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Later, one of the assistants whispered, "Mr. Reeves must be proud of you." She looked at her phone, half expecting a message from him. There was none. But when she returned to the penthouse that night, she found a framed copy of her sketch, displayed in the hallway, the one of him she had drawn weeks ago. No note, no words, just that quiet gesture. And for Lena, that silent acknowledgement spoke louder than any declaration could. It told her that the man behind the contract, behind the coldness and control, was slowly, almost unwillingly beginning to feel again. 2 nights later, the first storm of winter rolled through the city. Rain battered the glass walls of the penthouse, and thunder echoed across the skyline. Lena stood near the balcony, watching streaks of lightning cut through the dark. Behind her, the fire burned low, painting the room in amber light. Ethan had been gone all day for meetings, and the quiet stretched endlessly. When the elevator doors opened, she turned. Ethan stepped inside, his suit soaked from the rain, his hair damp against his forehead. He set down his briefcase and exhaled. "The car broke down 3 blocks away," he said. "I walked the rest." "You are drenched," she said quickly, rushing to grab a towel. "You will catch a cold." He raised an eyebrow, half amused. "You are giving me orders now?" "Someone has to," she replied, wrapping the towel around his shoulders before she realized what she had done. Her hands brushed the fabric near his collar, and for a heartbeat, they both froze. Neither spoke. The rain outside filled the silence. Ethan's gaze met hers, calm, steady, but softer than she had ever seen. "You broke rule number 1, he said quietly. Lena stepped back, flustered. It was not on purpose. His lips curved slightly. "That makes it worse." She tried to laugh it off, but the air between them had changed. He took the towel from her hands and said, "Thank you." His voice was gentle now, stripped of command. "You should sleep. Tomorrow will be busy." "I cannot sleep during storms," she admitted. "They make me restless." "Then stay here," he said, surprising them both. "I will make tea." They sat on opposite sides of the couch, the storm flickering beyond the glass. He poured the tea carefully, his hands steady even as the thunder rolled again. "When I was young," he said, looking into his cup, "I hated storms. My mother used to light candles to make them seem less frightening." "What changed?" she asked. "I learned that fear is useful," he replied. "It keeps people alert. It keeps me alive." Lena smiled faintly. "And yet you still make tea during thunder." He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Old habits are hard to kill." A sharp crack of thunder made her flinch. Without thinking, Ethan reached over and covered her hand with his. The gesture was brief, instinctive, but it shattered the last rule that still stood between them. For a long second, neither moved. The warmth of his hand spread through her like a secret she was not supposed to feel. He let go first. "You should go to bed," he said softly. "I think I will stay here a little longer," she whispered. Ethan stood, walking toward the window. Rain streaked down the glass, blurring the city lights. "You know," he said, his tone quiet, "I used to think emotions were a threat, but lately they feel more like proof that I am still human." She rose slowly and joined him by the window. "And what do you feel now?" He glanced at her, his voice barely audible, confused. Another flash of lightning illuminated their faces, close but not touching. The distance between them was no more than a breath. When the thunder faded, Ethan spoke again, steady but low. "Lena, if you stay here long enough, you will break every rule we made." "Maybe they deserve to be broken," she said. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Go rest, before I agree with you." As she turned to leave, his reflection lingered in the window, a man fighting a battle between reason and something far more dangerous. That night, neither of them slept. He stood by the glass until dawn, and she lay awake, listening to the storm fade into morning. Both knew the contract they signed on a bed was now only paper. The rules had already begun to fall apart. The storm passed, but its echo remained. The next few days at Reeves Enterprises were filled with tension. A new rumor spread through the company, whispering that Ethan's marriage was nothing more than a staged act. Someone inside the firm had leaked documents about their arrangement. The media swarmed again, more ruthless than before. When Lena arrived at the office one morning, flashes from cameras greeted her before she even stepped out of the car. Voices shouted questions she could not answer. "Is it true, Mrs. Reeves? Are you just a contract bride? How much are they paying you?" Security rushed to shield her as she hurried inside. Her chest tightened with every word. Ethan was waiting for her in his office, standing near the window. His expression was calm, but the storm she saw in his eyes was far worse than the one outside last night. "Who leaked it?" she asked. "Lucas," he said flatly. "My brother. He is pushing for my removal as CEO. He believes this scandal will help him take the company." Lena's heart sank. What will happen now? Ethan turned to face her, his jaw tense. "There will be a board hearing tomorrow morning. They will question everything, including you." "Me? You are the center of the rumor," he said quietly. "They will ask if this marriage is fake. If you admit that it started as a deal, they will strip me of my position." Her voice trembled. "What do you want me to say?" He hesitated, the first sign of hesitation she had ever seen in him. "Tell them the truth if you must. I will not force you to lie for me." The words were meant to sound noble, but they hurt. She stared at him. "And if the truth destroys you? Then it means I built everything on the wrong foundation," he said, "including this." She stepped closer, her voice sharp with emotion. "Ethan, you are not the only one who will lose something. Do you think the world will spare me? They will call me a fraud, a liar, a woman who sold herself." For a moment he said nothing. Then he took a slow breath. "I am sorry, Lena. It was not enough, but it was real." That night, the penthouse felt colder than ever. Ethan stayed in his office, reviewing files. Lena sat alone in the living room, the signed contract spread out before her. The words, "no touch, no emotion," stared back at her like an accusation. She thought about walking away, letting the chaos consume everything, but something in her refused. She could not let the man who once shielded her at the gala face the world alone. The next morning, the boardroom was full. Cameras, shareholders, and reporters filled the space. Lucas Reeves sat smugly near the end of the table. Ethan entered first, followed by Lena. When the questions began, they were brutal. "Mrs. Reeves," one member demanded, "is it true that your marriage was arranged for corporate protection?" Lena's pulse pounded. She glanced at Ethan. His eyes met hers steady, resigned. He was ready to fall. But she stood taller and said clearly, "It began as a contract, yes. But contracts do not create loyalty. People do. And if you think this man married me to save himself, you are wrong. He married me because he still believes in integrity, even when the world does not." The room went silent. Cameras flashed. Ethan's expression did not change, but his hand clenched slightly on the table, the only sign that her words had reached him. After the hearing, they walked out together through the crowd. Reporters shouted. Microphones stretched forward. But this time, Lena was not hiding. She looked straight ahead, her hand brushing against Ethan's as they stepped into the waiting car. Neither spoke, but both knew the cost of what had just happened. The truth was out. The rules were gone. And now, the real test had begun. The day after the hearing, the world seemed to stop breathing. News outlets replayed Lena's words from the boardroom again and again. Some called her brave, others called her foolish. But inside the penthouse, there was only silence. Ethan spent the morning pacing the study, fielding calls from investors and lawyers. Lena sat by the window, watching the city move beneath a gray sky. By noon, the damage was clear. Several board members had withdrawn support. Lucas Reeves called a press conference, declaring that Ethan's reckless, emotional decisions had endangered the company. Ethan's position as CEO was officially suspended pending review. When he finally returned home, his face was unreadable. He hung his jacket neatly on the rack and said quietly, "It is over." Lena stood. "What do you mean over?" "The board voted this afternoon," he said. "Lucas will take over as acting CEO until further notice. They said I need time to rebuild public trust." Her chest tightened. "That is not fair. You built that company from nothing." "Fairness has never been a requirement for survival," he replied. She stepped closer. "Then fight it, Ethan. Do not let him destroy everything you built." He looked at her, tired but calm. "If I fight, they will drag you through the mud again. I will not let that happen." Lena shook her head. "You protected me once. Let me protect you now." But he turned away. "It is too late." That night she found him sitting in the dark, staring at the framed sketch she had drawn of him, the one he had hung in the hallway. She approached quietly. "You should hate me," she said softly. "If I had stayed quiet, you would still be in control." He turned to her, voice low. "Lena, control is not the same as peace. You told the truth. You did what I could not." Her eyes filled with tears. "And what did it cost?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe everything. Maybe exactly what I needed." The next morning, headlines changed again. A clip of Lena's defense at the hearing had gone viral. Viewers called her speech the most genuine moment corporate America had seen in years. Donations poured in for the To Live Again Foundation, the charity she had started under Ethan's guidance. Later that afternoon, reporters waited outside the foundation's building as Lena arrived for an emergency press conference. Ethan appeared beside her unexpectedly, wearing a dark suit and a calm expression. The crowd buzzed with whispers as cameras flashed. He stepped to the microphone. "Good afternoon. I am here not as a CEO, but as a man who finally understands the difference between success and significance." The reporters fell silent. Ethan continued, "When my father died, I thought building an empire would honor him. But I forgot what truly matters: integrity, kindness, and the courage to stand by the people who believe in you. Lena reminded me of that. And because of her, I am starting again." He turned to her. Together, the audience erupted in applause. Reporters shouted questions, but Ethan and Lena walked off the stage side by side. For the first time, he did not care about the headlines. That evening, back at the penthouse, Lena found a small box on the dining table. Inside was the silver pen, the same one they had used to sign their marriage contract months ago. A folded note rested beneath it. In his handwriting it read, "The first time we signed for survival. The next time, let it be for love." She looked up, and Ethan stood in the doorway. He said quietly, "Tomorrow we start over without rules, without fear." For the first time, she saw not the reclusive millionaire, but the man behind the armor. The man who had finally learned that strength was not about control, but about the courage to feel. A week later, the city lights glowed softer than usual, as if even New York had paused to breathe. Inside the penthouse, the air was warm, filled with the faint scent of roses. The bed, the same bed where their contract began, was now covered in white petals. On the nightstand sat the silver pen and a single document. Ethan stood near the window, dressed simply in a black shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked peaceful, not like the man who once ruled every boardroom, but like someone who had finally found rest. Lena entered quietly, wearing a soft ivory dress, her hair loose over her shoulders. She smiled when she saw the paper on the bed. "Another contract?" He turned to her, a small, honest smile forming. "Just one more. Only one clause." She walked closer, reading the single line written in his familiar handwriting. "Clause 1. Stay, if your heart still chooses me." Her eyes shimmered. "And if it does?" He handed her the pen. "Then sign it." Lena looked at the document, then at him. "You do not need signatures anymore, Ethan. You already have what you wanted." He shook his head slowly. "This time, I do not want proof on paper. I just want a promise I can believe in." She took the pen, but instead of writing, she placed it gently on the table. "Then let this be my promise," she said, stepping closer. "No signatures, no rules, just us." For a long moment, they stood facing each other, the man who once hid behind logic and the woman who taught him how to feel. The city glowed beneath them, silent witness to their unspoken vows. Ethan reached for her hand, his voice quiet but steady. "The first time I asked you to sign something, it was for survival. The second time, it is for forever." Lena smiled through tears. "Then consider it signed." He pulled her gently into his arms, their foreheads touching. No contracts, no conditions, just the steady rhythm of two hearts finding the same pace. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft and unhurried. The camera of the world might still be watching, but they no longer cared. On the nightstand, the silver pen caught the light once more, reflecting a faint glow across the page. The words, "Stay, if your heart still chooses me," remained untouched, but their meaning was complete. As the scene faded, a final voiceover whispered over the image of their hands entwined. They signed once for survival, and again for love. In the end, it was never about rules or riches, only the courage to hold on when the world said let go. And for the first time, Ethan Reeves, the man who built an empire out of control, learned that the greatest wealth he could ever own was simply her heart.